Welcome to the Bible Feed podcast, a place of conversations about the Bible and faith in the modern world, where ordinary people come together to help each other understand the Bible better. Let's get started.
In this episode, Dan chats to Professor Anna Whittaker, who is a professor of behavioural medicine at Stirling University in Scotland. She's also a registered health psychologist and conducts research into stress and anxiety. They talk about her expertise and how it relates to some things Jesus said, and how knowing Jesus and being part of a faith community can help with stress and anxiety. But it's important to recognise, as they talk about towards the end of the episode, that severe depression and anxiety does need medical and professional help. So please, if you are struggling with something more than common day-to-day anxiety, do reach out to get help. We've linked to some helpful resources and support lines in the show notes on the website. Without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Bible Feed podcast. My name's Dan Weatherall, and today the topic that we're going to think about is worry and stress, and particularly learning from Jesus and other parts of the Bible about that. And really pleased to have Anna Whittaker to talk to me about that. Welcome, Anna.
Hi.
It's really, really good to be able to talk through this, and really good that you're joining us because you're in Scotland, aren't you? That's where you're joining me from, which I think is the furthest guest that we've had. I mean, I know you're not originally from there, are you? But which part of Scotland are you in?
We're in Stirling, in the middle.
Easy access to all the nice scenery and.
Yeah, it's great.
Good. Okay. So we've got you on to talk about something which probably affects every single person: stress and worry and anxiety and all that. And it's because you're a bit of an expert in stress. That's probably not the right way of terming it, is it? But do you want to tell me a little bit about your background and your expertise?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a professor of behavioural medicine. I started off as a health psychologist, but a lot of my research crosses across disciplines. So it looks at the links between mental health and physical health. So quite a big part of that is stress, where I've looked at stress and depression and other mental health issues. But I also look at physical behaviours as well, particularly at the moment, things like physical activity and the benefits that can have for different bodily systems like your immune system and your cardiovascular system. So at the moment, one of the main things we're looking at is how to keep older people socially connected, and can we use sport and physical activity as a way to do that, to improve well-being.
I imagine it's a big, wide topic or big, wide field of study, just because it seems to be a human experience, doesn't it, to stress and worry and anxiety and depression. And has there been a lot of talk in sort of the industry and the field of research about the impact of the last 18 months or so with the pandemic?
Yeah, there's been a lot. So sort of within academia, because I work at a university, stress levels among staff and students have massively increased. And then we did a project among older people, and stress and well-being were some of the things that we measured, and saw quite a big change on average for the worse, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. Yeah,
some of the real detrimental impacts manifesting itself, I suppose, and that might last for some while to come. So yeah, it's a very relevant thing to think about, and we're going to be thinking about some of the things that Jesus said about worry and anxiety, and then other parts of the Bible as well, I hope. So one of the things we do in a Bible Feed, some of our episodes, they're sort of straight Bible study, as it were, and they're great as well. Sometimes we really try and just bring out the implications of life, or trying to have faith in the modern world. And I think that this one is almost going to be a bit of a bridge between the two, which is really, really, really good, because it's important to, at least I think it's important to look at the Bible and study the Bible, but actually apply it as well and sort of bring it forward to day-to-day life. And I need help people to drag me into the real life sometimes when I'm looking at the Bible. So I'm hoping that you're able to sort of help us through that. So let's think first of all then about Jesus and what Jesus had to say about people worrying and stressing and so on. How much did he have to say about that?
There's quite a bit in Matthew where Jesus sort of gives us advice about not worrying, and he gives us examples like, look at the birds, they're not worrying about where they live or food. Look at the lilies, how beautiful they are. He compares them to like King Solomon, and how he was very rich and would have looked fantastic, I'm sure, dressed up in all his kingly stuff. But Jesus reminds us that flowers don't worry about all those sorts of things and are just beautiful. And he's basically trying to get us to think, don't be worrying about these day-to-day things like eating and drinking and what clothes you're going to put on, because God is going to look after you.
Yeah, that's probably easier said than done, isn't it? And just thinking of the context at the time, he's speaking to people who probably are surviving or having to survive more than perhaps you and I as well. So it's really quite a challenging thing, isn't it? That he's asking them to do.
I think it's not easy at all, and I'm actually particularly bad at not worrying,
Okay.
and particularly bad at not having a lot of stress, which is just ironic, really. But I don't think Jesus is telling us off for worrying. I don't think he's saying, worry is a sin, you're a terrible person if this is how you feel. I think he's just trying to get us to reprioritize, to think about the bigger picture, the longer term, rather than the day-to-day, rather than getting bogged down with the things that don't really matter, and to try and have faith, and try and replace that worry with faith that God knows that we need those things, and he will look after that for us.
So a bigger picture or looking to a different thing. There's that context in Matthew 6. So you sort of alluded to Matthew 6, didn't you, about looking at the birds and the lilies and so on. And then just a few verses before that, verse 19, where he says, do not lay up yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I wonder if part of that is if you've got your heart in the treasure that you're trying to lay up on earth, all these things that you're trying to build on earth, your property and all these sorts of things, you're going to be anxious and stressing about all those things. And actually, if your priorities are different, then perhaps he's giving a bit of advice there. Do you think, is that something in that, materialism? Like I've already highlighted the difference between the period of time when Jesus was speaking and, our day-to-day life today, where it's all about getting and having material things. Does that have an impact?
There's two kinds of situations, aren't there? There's a situation where you genuinely don't have your basic needs met. You haven't got enough food to put on the table for you or for your kids, and then which is obviously a stress, quite rightly. And then you've got the other end of the extreme, which is actually the things we're worrying about are that we want more, and we always want more, and we're just trying to get more and trying to earn more so that we can buy more and have more stuff. And that actually does give you a lot of worry. I mean, look at people with enormous houses and, all the CCTV that they have to set up. Okay, I'll give an example. I bought my husband a dog a couple of years ago, and then during the pandemic, these dogs, it's a cockapoo, these dogs like tripled in price. And even something daft like a dog, it's out in the garden and you're thinking, these have been getting stolen quite a lot because people know how much they're worth now. And it's having that sort of thing in the back of your mind. Imagine if you've got that about all your possessions. Yeah, it does certainly ramp up the stress and anxiety.
So the worry about getting it, and then once you've got it, the worry about keeping hold of it, where thieves can break through and steal. So yeah, Jesus is sort of saying, don't think and don't concentrate your priorities on those sorts of things because there's something greater. That's what I think you're saying, aren't you? So, I mean, it's interesting as well because there's no sort of blanket promise that God is going to provide absolutely everything, for all these things, is there? I mean, times are tough. You're not always going to get the things that you think you need. And I suppose it's readjusting expectations a bit, isn't it? Because there are greater and better things. There's a future. There's blessing in the future that Jesus is talking about.
Yeah, there is. And I think also, with the kind of faith that God will look after you, there's also the element of faith where you've got to think, well, okay, perhaps I am really struggling right now, but God's going to work with this situation and work it out. So even if you're in a really difficult situation, it's not that God's going to hand you everything on a plate and life's going to be easy. It's not, but he will work with you even in those bits that are difficult.
So the other thing that he talks about is not worrying about tomorrow, doesn't he? That's an interesting concept, isn't it? Not worrying too much about what tomorrow might bring, concentrate on today.
There's a saying that worrying about what might happen and what's going to happen in the future is kind of the basis of anxiety, and then sort of replaying worry over what's happened in the past is often quite common in depression. And I think it's true, with anxiety and worry, so much of it is, well, what if this happens tomorrow, or just uncertainty about tomorrow. And I think Jesus is really trying to just say, look, each day is enough as it is. Just try and get through the day and live in the moment rather than always thinking about what's the next thing. And it's, there is quite a lot of that in psychology at the moment, and it draws on sort of Eastern philosophy in terms of things like mindfulness. That I'm sure, everybody's heard of mindfulness, and a lot of how that works is being in the present, rather than worrying about the past. You can't change the past, or worrying about the future because it's things that might not happen, and then you've expended all that energy worrying rather than expending energy on what you're dealing with right now.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, that we're sort of realizing the benefits of just dealing with your day-to-day life right now, the present, and all those different other practices that talk about that. Because Jesus has practically said it, hasn't he, back here in Matthew. So there's two things, aren't there? So one thing is, don't think about the present so much that you're anxious about getting everything that you want right here, right now, because actually there's a future promised. But actually, don't worry about tomorrow, the future, or as in, don't think about what you're trying to plan, what you might get tomorrow or what tomorrow might bring, and worry about that, because actually situating yourself in the present and dealing with that is going to help your mind and your mental health in that sense, or your well-being.
I think Jesus wants us to have a kind of peace of mind in each day. That's not to say don't think ahead at all and don't plan at all, but definitely that if you're always worrying about the now and having stuff, if you're always worrying about what might happen tomorrow, you are going to be pretty distressed a lot of the time.
So if you've got your heart and your treasures on a particular thing that actually is not permanent, or it could be destroyed, or it could be stolen, then you're going to be worried about that. But if you've got your treasure in heaven, or as it were, with God, God's the one that can give you the ultimate future, which is what I think he's sort of talking about, then you should have a peace of mind. That's really good. Okay, brilliant. So let's just think a bit more. What are the root causes? I suppose we've talked about a few of them, haven't we? Worrying about material things, but what else is some of the root causes of stress and anxiety?
I guess some of the main causes of stress are big changes in your life and lack of control over your own choices. So big changes are things like what we call stressful life events. There's a top 5. It's things like bereavement, marriage, separation or divorce, moving house, and I always forget the 5th one. But these are the common things that everyone experiences at some point, or probably some of them, but they lead to such a lot of change that you're adapting for quite a long time. And another part of that stress is having to adapt to change, but having too many demands. So where you're left in a position where you feel like you haven't actually got the resources, whether that's psychologically within yourself or in your social network, to kind of help you, or enough time or the capacity to actually handle these stressful things. So that can be why work can be stressful, because you might have a workload that is beyond the actual time and capabilities that you've got, or you might perceive it that way. So stress can often be, that's how you perceive it, which is often more important than the actual event.
So big life events, but also just day to day. That's day-to-day surviving and going to work.
Yeah. And they add up cumulatively though. So, if you're going through something like recovering from a bereavement, and then you've got, lack of control over choices at work, then even the smallest sort of small acute stresses, like you've lost your keys, or you've locked yourself out of your car or something like that, can just send you over your ability to cope. Whereas if you weren't dealing with other stressful things, maybe you'd just handle those and move on. So it can kind of add up, which is why people get to a stage where they can't cope. Yeah, okay.
It struck me, you sort of describing those big sort of key triggers, big life events. Jesus went through some of those things, didn't he? Like, I don't know, he talks about not having anywhere to lay his head, so not really having a fixed place to live, so moving around permanently. Bereavement, John the Baptist, and then Lazarus, his friend as well, even though it says that it's the shortest verse in the Bible, isn't it? Jesus wept when he was outside the tomb of Lazarus. So grief overcome him at that moment. And then losing friends as well. So Judas, knowing that he was betraying him. These are huge things. So is it that Jesus would have had stress? would have felt these things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, okay, Jesus was the Son of God, so he had, extra support an extra strong relationship with God, perhaps a lot stronger than what we have. But that he was also a man, so that doesn't mean that he wouldn't have really felt all of these things. Even if something painful is necessary because it's part of a longer term solution to something, it doesn't mean it's not awful at the time. And I imagine, well, there's a verse, isn't there, that said he was tested and tried in all the same ways that we are. So that means even when we're in the detail, he's been through all the same stresses and struggles and worries and grief that we go through, and that's how he's able to understand us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really important part of knowing who he is, isn't it? I think that he was someone like us. Perhaps, speaking for myself, knowing sort of what the Bible says about that he's a man and he experienced these things and he was tempted like us and that sort of thing is one thing in theory, but when we're talking about the topic of day-to-day stressful situations and anxiety and so on, and then thinking about Jesus in that sense, that probably really makes it come alive a bit more, actually, and just really appreciate what he would have gone through. Like you said, he had that close relationship with the Father, with God, and other coping mechanisms as well. Some close friends, his disciples. That's presumably a key.
That's huge. Yeah, having a social network of people who actually support you, not just people who are just there. And I think that's that's something that God encouraged Jesus to have, to select the 12 disciples to be the closest people, even though there were other disciples as well. He was very close to Lazarus and Mary, but having those people who were actually able to drop everything and be there with him, that is massive towards helping you deal with stress.
Even though they didn't fully understand, did they? I mean, you read through the Gospels and they really didn't get what was going on, but you do get the moments of clarity that come through when, for example, is it Peter that says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God? And I think, does Jesus turn around in John 6 and say, everyone's leaving me, are you going to go as well? And they say, well, to whom shall we go? You've got the words of eternal life. So that must have meant so much to him, sort of to keep him going.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's just massive reinforcement of that they did understand enough to be able to help. I mean, even in those times where they were a bit clueless and didn't quite understand why he was going to have to die, why he was going to have to go through such a horrible scenario leading up to his death as well. They were there and they cared about him. And we're like that. Sometimes you have people who can give you great advice and really understand the situation, and that's great. Sometimes you just need people there who actually love you and are there for you.
That's really good to think through. So I suppose just applying that to ourselves, and we've noted right at the start how that stress is on the rise. We're all have lived through some quite stressful times. So yeah, having people, having community, having friends, and particularly people who understand. So a faith community is really going to be valuable, isn't it? Really, really important.
Yeah, people who know where you're coming from. They've got similar goals. You might not always think exactly the same as them, but you've got enough in common that you can support each other.
And even in the garden, so the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus reaches the garden and he says, my soul is troubled even to the point of death, doesn't he? That's when he said that he was suffering from deep depression or whatever it might be. And he had his disciples who slept on, didn't they? They didn't. I mean, they were sort of with him, close by, but sleeping. And that moment, he spends it in prayer with God. And I suppose that's the close relationship with someone. In this sense, his Father, God, which is something quite special. But yeah, having that really close relationship, which I guess is something for us as well. In the depths of despair, when friends, they might help you to some extent. They might be sleeping metaphorically, close by you, but not quite fully understanding. There's always prayer to God, just to pour out what you're feeling to him.
I think that was probably the lowest point for Jesus. So I think he probably was really acutely depressed at that point, and he was isolated as well. And if you think sometimes it's a bit like that with us, isn't it? Sometimes we have to get to our absolute lowest point before we really, really reach out to God. So while we might talk to God, on and off throughout the day and with various things in our lives, sometimes when you've really hit rock bottom or something awful's happened is when, reaching out to God is the answer. And Jesus obviously found support in that.
Yeah, because the narrative after that is him approaching or being led to trial and just being able to stay silent and not retaliate and not fight back and not fight for his survival, which is just quite astonishing, really. So we talked about triggers of this sort of thing. What might be some of the signs? Let's just sort of back up a little bit. What might be some of the signs that people are suffering from anxiety or stress?
Okay, well, there's a whole range of like physical signs. So there's things that you might notice yourself. You might feel that your heart is beating faster, or it might feel like it's really thudding. Your blood pressure usually increases. Now that you might not be able to feel, but things like butterflies in your stomach and a feeling of panic and breathlessness. All these are kind of physical signs and symptoms of stress, and then they're kind of a result of your psychological perceptions of stress, which is where you're feeling, you can't cope with the demands being placed on you, or you're going over and over the same worries in your head. And it really becomes, this is completely normal, and this is how we deal with life. But it becomes unhealthy. It becomes an issue when it's really regular and it's really intense. And that'll be different regularities and intensities for different people before it becomes a real problem where they're not coping. But it can have, knock-on effects on like your sleep and on your relationships. You might try and deal with it by adopting poor habits, like drinking more alcohol or not eating very healthily. So this stress is a combination of psychological and physical symptoms and behaviours.
It's hard to think of, thinking of all those sort of symptoms and the way it sort of expresses itself. It's hard to think about Jesus specifically in that sense. But as we've thought already, he clearly went through all these typical triggers in his life, and clearly was upset and overtaken with grief at times and so on. So I suppose, he would have dealt with all those feelings as well, through his life.
Definitely. You mentioned earlier when he was, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane just before he was brought to trial, and it says there, doesn't it, his sweat was like great drops of blood, which is another, physical manifestation of stress, is that intense sweating. And yeah, I imagine that was, as well as him feeling incredibly low right then, that would have been a very, very stressful period of time.
Yeah, really brings that to home, doesn't it? I think, thinking about that. So let's think a little bit about what Jesus offers then, because there's that passage. I'm just going to read it out to you. It's in Matthew 11, really sort of famous passage of some of the things that Jesus said. It says, verse 28 of Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It's absolutely wonderful passage there, isn't it? So he's effectively giving an invitation to everyone who's feeling weary, suffering from these sorts of things. So let's just think about that. How does knowing Jesus, how does coming to faith and believing in Jesus, how does that help if you're weary and you're heavy laden? How does it help you?
I think it just makes you realise there's something bigger out there. So it brings you out of the kind of minutiae of your situation that you're struggling with, and makes you realise, that there is something in the future to hope for when Jesus returns, and we're told that is going to be so amazing that it's beyond our comprehension to even think how amazing it is. But I think as well as that, it's also about how we can be now. I think Jesus is saying, just put yourself outside the situation you're in, and just think about how you can have peace with trust in God, how replacing worrying with faith and trust can bring you peace now. So it's not all about living for the future, but it's about entering into that rest now. I think there's a verse in Hebrews that says, where God says they're entering into my rest, and it's not the tense of it is not that it's all talking about the future, and that we hope to be in the kingdom of God with Jesus on earth, but it's also talking about now, entering. It's like this is a process that's happening to us now in our lifetimes, if we will let God and Jesus into our lives, rather than being very tunnel vision, caught up in our own day-to-day worries.
That's interesting. It just made me think of what you just said then. I think you said one of the triggers is not being in control, or not having sort of control over your life effectively. And life can feel like that, probably for the most of us who don't have access to resources to do exactly what you want when you want. But yeah, realizing there's something bigger, I think the words you said, somebody in control who actually can secure your life, not necessarily make everything perfect right now, but the one who's promised something in the future. There's that. I guess that's part of it, isn't it? To give you peace of mind now, realizing that you might not be able to individually make your life better, but someone will, and someone is, in the process of doing that, and he's in control.
Absolutely, and also, it's not that this is an easy thing. I think we do need practice at this. But I think if we do practice that and really try and keep a focus on Jesus, it will, it won't make you ignore the things you're going through, but it will just help you feel like you're dealing with them. And even just feeling that sense of control, a little bit of control, will bring those stress levels down.
So this offer, so just thinking again a little bit more about what Jesus is saying, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. I suppose there's, every single person can feel a bit like that. He dealt with lots of different people, didn't he, Jesus? He sort of spoke to lots of different people. I guess that's helpful as well, knowing that he went out of his way to speak to different people who perhaps were heavy laden by the society at the time because they were mistreated or whatever. Did you see that?
And he had like a different message for each audience, didn't he? People who were really downtrodden and on the fringe of society, he's trying to boost them up. And he's sort of, when he's talking about like the meek, they're going to inherit the earth. But then on the other hand, when he's talking to like the Pharisees and Sadducees who were, the cream of society and very privileged at the time, his message to them is much more kind of trying to bring them to their senses and actually telling them off for some of the behaviour. So yeah, he spoke to lots of different audiences and always seemed to have the right message for those different audiences.
Yeah, and certainly went out of his way to include the people who were basically excluded from society. So yeah, knowing that, I think, can be a big help if you're feeling disjointed from society or disjointed or rejected, as it were. But actually, Jesus is there calling you, inviting this peace of mind to come to you. So knowing him, getting to know him and the things that God has spoken about through him and offered. So Jesus went through all of this. So we've thought about that. I think that's really helped me focus my mind a little bit about the fact that he has gone through all these problems that sometimes we think are like kind of modern problems, stress and anxiety. You think, oh, well, we've got such busy lives these days and so on. But actually, these are very much human feelings that people would have felt all throughout history. And so Jesus would have felt all of that as well. That passage in Matthew 11 talks about sort of take my yoke upon you. So you're kind of sharing his yoke, as it were, the yoke of oxen. This is the old fashioned ploughing, isn't it? The image of taking that big crossbeam and pulling a plough like an oxen would do. So you're effectively sharing it with Jesus, which means he's an example to us. So, do you think that's helpful, having his as an example?
Yeah, and I think also it's really nice because when you're in a, if you're sharing a yoke with someone, literally, you're walking alongside them, aren't you? And then Jesus says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So, sometimes we put barriers in our own way, don't we? We think, oh, actually following Jesus might be really hard work. But Jesus is saying, walk alongside me and you'll see that actually my yoke is easy. And he can give us confidence, moving forwards.
Yeah, that's a really lovely image, actually. And it's not that you're not having to carry a yoke. So there's still going to be real life to deal with, I suppose. There's still work, there's still things to do, but actually it's manageable. You can cope, you can do this because Jesus is alongside you. So I want to move forward a little bit into the New Testament and just think more about other parts. Well, particularly there's that passage, isn't there, that Paul talks about in Philippians. He talks about how Christ strengthens him. Should we read a little bit of that? It's Philippians 4, I think. Because I think this might do like the next step on. We've thought about the topic just generally. We've thought about it applying to Jesus and how that he dealt with it. He had coping mechanisms and so on. We thought about how that could be an example, but here's the Apostle Paul now talking about his life and his mindset, his peace of mind, and so on. Let's have a look. Philippians 4 and verse 11. He talks about he has learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So he's talking about Jesus, isn't he, effectively? So I guess there's one that modelled sharing the yoke of Jesus and having him as his example. And though he suffered hunger at times and He didn't have everything he needed, and yet he felt like he could do everything through Christ that strengthens him.
Absolutely. And I really do think, if we ask for that strength, that we can receive it. I mean, if you think what Paul went through, multiple shipwrecks and flogging and being stoned, to the point where they actually thought he was dead. These aren't light things. And no matter what difficulties we go through in our lives, hopefully we won't have those specific ones. And yet Paul can still say this because he called on God, because he put his faith in Jesus. He was able to cope with it all.
Yeah, and I guess putting everything that we've said into practice, not worrying about where he's going to get his next meal from. He's just going to travel along, find the next community of believers to help. He's going to, but he's not going to just expect God to provide, because he's going to make tents in the evening as well, so he can earn a little bit of living while he's doing it, and not worry about amassing his wealth. So he's not got to worry about CCTV. Yeah, so everything we've talked about, actually, now I think about it, is pretty much sort of exemplified in his life. I mean, the whole chapter there, it was well worth, anyone listening to go back and look at that, actually, Philippians chapter 4, because it's so powerful, talking about how, middle of verse 5, the Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So yeah, do not be anxious about anything. And we've talked about prayer. So I guess, putting your concerns to someone, to God, in having that relationship with God to do that. And then achieving peace of God that passes all understanding.
Definitely. I mean, I think sometimes you're in difficult situations where you've got absolutely no control whatsoever, and you have to hand that over to God and put that in his hands. And there is a certain amount of peace that you get immediately from doing that and realizing that, rather than continuing to try and sort out the problem yourself. And sometimes it takes us a long time to get to that point where we realize, I can't actually solve this. I need to put this in God's hands, and I'll go and do something else, and stop lying awake worrying about it. But I think that's part of what that passage is talking about, is that peace is almost instant when we do that.
Just one other thing, thinking about that passage, it's in the context, isn't it, of Paul receiving a gift from the Philippians. So they're, I think, out of their poverty, they're not necessarily a particularly rich group of believers, of Christians, but they keep supplying Paul with support effectively after he's left them. They keep sort of sending, I can only assume, a bag of money to just help him to support his work and his ministry, make sure he's not on the streets for the next few nights. So, and it's his community again. So all these aspects we've thought about, it having that support network, having that community of faith around you to really help provide, and then concentrate on the things that are important, priorities. That's what comes next, actually. Verse 8, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, lovely, commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So don't worry about, or don't think about things that you might not be able to change about your life. But think about these things. These are things that are going to help you reach the peace of God. So there's a lot in the life of Paul, I think we probably could expand out on, but I guess we won't do right now in this episode. There's one other thing I think I just want to chat through, and I'm sort of coming at this not an expert at all on this, and you're the expert, but I'm assuming that maybe in a lot of cases, stress and anxiety can be either linked with clinical depression or real medical conditions and so on. So I don't think I want to give the impression at all that just thinking, get your priorities right, telling someone who's suffering from severe depression that they just need to get the priorities right, that's going to solve it. Presumably that's not what we, that's not our message, is it? There's a need for seeking professional help.
There's a place for it, and I think sometimes the worst things you can say to people are, you just need to pray about it. If they're really severely, they've got actually clinical depression or anxiety, then prayer can help. Someone telling you that is not what you want to hear, and you do need other sorts of support as well. So you would go to your doctor and talk about medication, or talk about counselling or talking therapies. We've got access to those sort of privileges, at least in the Western world, fairly easily. So, if your leg was falling off, you wouldn't not go and have surgery. And it's the same for mental health conditions. You wouldn't expect somebody with a broken leg to sort of pray it back into joint and mend the bones, although they could pray that the healing would be improved, but you'd still get help, wouldn't you? And it's just because mental conditions are perhaps more invisible doesn't mean you shouldn't get help, which you definitely should.
Yeah, it can go hand in hand, can't it? So just thinking again, how that Paul was provided for by his fellow believers, his part of his community. That was sort of physical help, and his sort of prayer or his reliance on God didn't stop that and didn't stop him accepting that. So going out and having help, but at the same time casting your cares upon him. That's somewhere in the Psalms, isn't it? I think effectively you're releasing the burden of feeling that the anxiety of this when you take it to God in prayer, but then at the same time seeking the help that you need. And so we suppose we're talking about the day-to-day anxiety we all feel day to day, maybe like the life situations that you've talked about, and those sorts of things are going to be helped by knowing Jesus and having that peace of God that passes all understanding. But for sure, there's clinical conditions which we definitely need. People need to seek help for those sorts of things. So as well as knowing Christ, that's no matter what difficulties and conditions and illnesses, physical or mental or otherwise, we all have. Knowing Christ is the thing that we need. Brilliant. So that's been great. Is there anything else that's worth just bringing up? Any other closing thoughts? Just
a couple of kind of personal verses that I go to when I'm particularly struggling. And one is that I always sort of bear in mind that in Corinthians we're told you're not going to be tested, beyond what you can bear. So even though you might feel, oh, this is horrendous, I actually can't handle this. If you truly trust God, then God knows you can and will help you through it. So you're not going to get tested to the point of breaking. And also in Romans 8 is an amazing chapter, but there's a verse that says that all things work together for good for those who love God. And all of those things working together, some of them are going to be tough and really difficult, but they're going to work together for good because we love God. And I think that can really help us when we're in a particularly sort of worrying situation or when we're in a cycle of stress.
That's a fantastic chapter, isn't it? Because that's the one where he talks about if you've been justified, you've been glorified, and so on. He's talking about sort of future glorification as in the past tense, as if it all happened. Those who are called and justified and glorified. So the certainty of that is what everything is working towards. In fact, even isn't it all the things that Romans 8, I'm just going to turn to it now because make sure I get this right. That's right. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. And then towards the end, I'm sure that neither death nor life, angels, rulers, things present, things to come, powers, height, depth, anything else can separate us from the love of God. So all these things, if you realize you will be justified and glorified, and it's certain because you're in Christ and your faith and trust is in him, then whatever your life throws at you, all these terrible situations that height, depth, whatever these things sort of signify, the ups and downs of life, then they can't separate us from the love of God in Christ. That's a great chapter to end on. So thanks for that. So thank you so much, Anna.
It's all right.
It's been really good to talk through the topic that we probably all need to face. It's only going to get a more stressful world, I suppose. So something that's well worth thinking about, how having Jesus in your life can help now and help obtain the peace of God that passes all understanding. But ultimately, what it's all about is all about that future glorification that we just looked at in Romans. So loads in there to think about, and I really, really hope it's helpful to anyone listening. If you've got any feedback, any thoughts, whether it's helped you, any questions or anything, please feel free to get in touch with us. You can go to our website, biblefeed.org. You can let us know what you think there. Follow us on Facebook as well. You can let us know what you think there. Find us on Instagram. We enjoy your questions and your feedback, and it's really, really great to hear from you.
You've been listening to the Bible Feed podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're always keen to hear what you think and hear your questions on subjects you'd like us to discuss. Get in touch with us on our Facebook page or send us a message from our webpage at biblefeed.org and be part of the journey.